Welcome to the 2022 DiLCo lecture series on digital language and communication. I am Yannis Androutopoulos from the University of Hamburg. DiLCo is a 3-year scientific network on digital language variation and context initiated in 2021. It is coordinated from Hamburg by Heike Zinsmeister and myself, 2 linguists, and currently includes scholars from universities in the US, UK, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Denmark. DiLCo is generously supported by the University of Hamburg within the Universities of Excellence scheme funded by the German federal government and the federal states. DiLCo aims to stimulate scientific exchange between various approaches to digital language and communication research within linguistics, and to bridge gaps between qualitative and quantitative research methods. To this purpose, we are organizing online and on-site activities such as conference panels, methods workshops, and this DiLCo lecture series. Our lectures showcase cutting-edge international research by senior and younger scholars who draw on key concepts in social cultural linguistics to shed light on digital language practices. We are recording these lectures to build up a repository that is available open access from Hamburg University's video portal Lecture to Go, and the access to that is through the DiLCo website. Each lecture is about 40 to 45 minutes, followed by discussion. Feel free to post questions and comments into the chat during the lecture. It is now with much pleasure that I introduce today's speakers, Carmen Lee. Carmen is Associate Professor in the Department of English at Chinese University of Hong Kong. Carmen serves currently as Associate Editor of the journal Discourse, Context and Media and as a co-editor of the book series Routledge, Language and Digital Media. Carmen Lee is one of the most prolific and influential researchers of digital language and discourse in the last 15 years. She has done research on a wide range of subjects, including self-presentation online, multilingualism online, digital literacy practices of various kinds, and she has developed over the time innovative multi-method approaches involving focus groups and interviews and techno-social biographies alongside the analysis of textual data. Her major publications, apart from a series of articles that are too numerous to mention, I guess, they include Language Online, 2013, co-authored with David Barton, Multilingualism Online, 2017, and she just completed a special issue on face work in online discourse for the Journal of Pragmatics, co-edited with Tuija Virtanen. Her most recent research is on aggressive discourses, hate speech, and doxxing online. And this is what her talk today will be about: digital discourse and public policy, the case of doxxing in Hong Kong. Thank you for being with us, Carmen, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yannis. Let me just share my screen. Can you see it? Okay, right. Let me just... Okay, thanks, Yannis, for the introduction, and thanks for having me as part of this wonderful series, DiLCo. So the purpose of my talk today is to share with you some findings from my recently completed project, really recently. You know, I just submitted my final report a few weeks ago on doxing discourses in Hong Kong. And more specifically, I'm going to explore the intersection of digital discourse analysis and public policy research, especially policy related to internet practices. And I'll also discuss some possible methodological implications and, of course, policy relevance arising from the project. So what is doxing? Now, the term is not familiar to everyone, so I think it's good to unpack it a little bit here. So the word dox, D-O-X, okay, comes from the short form for documents, okay, dox, D-O-C-S, which is an old school revenge tactic from the hacker culture in the 90s. So doxing itself is hard to define, but is commonly understood as the unauthorized seeking and publishing of others' personal information, often with the aim of publicly shaming targets for their perceived wrongdoings. So you have to name someone before you can shame them. So in other words, doxing practice is the weaponization of personal data, because identifying an individual is the first step to punishing or shaming them. There are various methods that people have used to dox someone, typically using search engines like Googling or looking up someone's information or social media profile, websites, and so on. There's also collective forms of data gathering, performing collectively, calling out someone on public forums, hacking, looking someone up on public registers, even through friends and contacts. That means you can be betrayed, by people who leak your information for various purposes. Now doxing can take many forms. Okay, so mass media tends to focus on the more malicious intent of doxing because of the growth of the cancel culture or the so-called digital vigilantism. There's also a wide range of other motives as categorized by Anderson and Moot, who built upon Douglas's earlier work. First is the so-called de-anonymizing doxing, which is the release of personal information to reveal the identity of a formerly anonymous individual, which is the most typical kind. There's also targeting doxing, which is the disclosure of personal information that locates the target physically, or to identify their contact details like phone numbers, which were previously private. Delegitimizing doxing reveals the intimate personal information that may damage the reputation of an individual. And then there are also two other kinds of doxing which are worth paying more attention to, I think. The first is unintentional doxing, which is completely accidental. For example, journalists may, through their journalistic investigation, fail to protect the anonymity of individuals accidentally without the intent to dox. There's also the so-called public interest doxing, which is motivated by a belief that the disclosure of personally identifiable information will promote the well-being of the general public. So for example, in mainland China, there's this so-called human flesh search engine, where netizens collectively gather targets' personal data, which has reportedly uncovered such illegal acts as corruption of government officials, resulting in them being fired or arrested even. So this type of doxing, according to Anderson and Moot, can be considered as a form of public interest doxing. So there's this emerging literature on doxing from non-linguistic perspectives or disciplines such as ethics research, legal research, behavior research, psychology, and other forms of social sciences. But very little work has been done from a language and discourse perspective. So my present study, the completed study, I should say, it's called Doxing in Hong Kong, a discourse analytic perspective, funded by the Hong Kong government's public policy research funding scheme. And the rationale of the study stems from the fact that much of the academic work done on doxing, and in fact, aggressive online practices are grounded in other non-linguistic disciplines through quantitative surveys, without really considering how doxing unfolds in actual context of communication. So when we look at examples and cases of doxing, we will realize that they're actually largely initiated and sustained by language and discourse. So that's pretty much the background of my study. Now, in fact, in recent years, we see more work that tap into the language and discourse strategies of online aggression, notably in pragmatics. For example, there's been work on the pragmatics of flaming, trolling, hate speech, and online public shaming, OPS. And these works have largely employed existing theories of pragmatics, building upon previous conceptualizations of face work and impoliteness in speech acts like disagreement, conflicts, and insults. And another strand of research is to understand online aggression as discursive action, which also informs our project here. My understanding of discourse is informed by principles of CDA, critical discourse analysis, in that discourse is a social practice that is shaped by and in turn also shapes the situation, institution, and social structure that frames this discourse. This is not to resort everything to discourse only, but rather it is the recognition of the power of discourse in shaping people's attitudes in these controversial online practices. And CDA is also a problem-oriented and interdisciplinary in approach, which makes it particularly relevant in understanding a complex social problem like doxing. Now, some acts of aggression are deliberate in nature, for example, by the use of clearly offensive language towards a specific target, which already presupposes exclusion. Other forms are done through the use of more covert linguistic strategies like irony and dehumanizing metaphors to negatively construct outgroups. And these are evident in doxing incidents where the targets are often negatively constructed by the doxers to justify doxing. So in our study, we understand doxing as discursive action, which exhibits, first of all, intertextuality, because the success of doxing relies on the doxer compiling and putting together a variety of sources, resources and source text from the target's social media profiles, websites, and other offline materials even. And as you see here, this edited image is actually a screenshot from a Hong Kong discussion forum, which shows a screenshot of a police officer's personal Facebook profile. And his name and other personal data are listed here. And secondly, doxing is characterized by recontextualization, because most of us have an experience of sharing our private aspects of our lives in social media, like family photos, or we may be posting about news stories, politics, and so on. Even when such content is meant to be shared with close friends and families only, it can be easily taken out of their original context by anyone and reposted them for other purposes on a different platform. So in this way, doxing can also be understood as recontextualized social practice because of the increasing possibilities of accidentally sharing our data to an unknown audience. So doxing is not simply about impoliteness, as it often calls for more abusive or even criminal behavior, such as swatting, which is the act of deceiving an emergency service into sending a team of police officers to another person's address. In Hong Kong, targets of doxing could be as random as a stranger not wearing a mask or not wearing a mask properly in public. So this is a group, a Facebook group called Maskless Shaming Facebook group, okay, where they post random strangers not wearing their mask on the metro or anywhere in the public, and then being scrutinized online. Other cases are more high profile in nature or more political in nature. As you may know, during the violent crackdown of the Hong Kong protests a few years ago, numerous police officers have been doxed in Hong Kong. And during that time, hatred was extended to all police officers, such that even random officers spotted in the public were doxed. And this antagonism was also extended to their family members. Kids of these police officers were reportedly bullied at the school because other kids were told by their parents that, hey, your classmates' parents were police officers, and so on and so forth. So as a result, an anti-doxing law was introduced just last year in response to the rise of the high-profile doxing cases targeting police officers and even government officials. And this is a simplified timeline of doxing and its criminalization in Hong Kong. I'm not going into the details here, but as you can see, doxing incidents actually existed way before the protests in 2019. But of course, it is always the more high-profile cases that draw officials' attention. So the doxing law, however, met with much backlash from some members of the public and tech companies who found the law extremely vague on the one hand. On the other hand, the major argument against the law is, of course, its potential threat to freedom of expression, or the so-called verbal criminalization online. So in a way, the project sets out to also deconstruct this controversy by examining the discursive strategies opponents and proponents of the anti-doxing law use to legitimize or delegitimize doxing and its regulation. The doxing law in Hong Kong is mainly promoted by the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data, PCPD, which is a statutory body that takes care of anything related to privacy and data protection in Hong Kong. Now they have been given much more power to investigate doxing cases actively, which again has become controversial. This is how they define doxing on their website. As you see here, this is very broad, with a wide range of possible methods of eliciting personal data. We'll come to that in a second. This is the key section of the doxing law that has been added recently to the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance. Now, if you just take a very quick look at the key sections here, you will find certain expressions like intent, harm. These terms are very vague and broad. And what was actually quite interesting and perhaps quite exciting for to the project team was that this law was enforced halfway through the project. So we added more follow-up questions to the interview and to find out whether our participants actually understood or were aware of the law and what did they think about it. So these are the original research questions for the project. The aim was to cover discourses from multiple stakeholders and perspectives. So the first research question actually covered the voices from netizens. How do they represent doxing in online discussion forums? The second question covers young people's voices, the users of the forum. What do they think about doxing? And the third question deals with any conflicting discourses between the official definition and ordinary people's understanding of doxing. And the final question is more about policy implications. And in this talk, I'll highlight some of the key findings, and I'll focus more on the conflicting discourses between the public and the official understanding of it. There were three key phases of the study. So the first phase, we collected a database of doxing related to discussions on a local forum called LIHKG, which is a forum notable for extreme political discussions, where the incidents of doxing were also identified. And in this phase of the project, we analyzed the forum participants' discourse strategies through CDA, focusing on the argumentation strategies that legitimize and redefine doxing. And the second phase analyzed university students' attitudes and perceptions through an online survey with 500 respondents, 3 focus group interviews with 13 participants, and from whom we identified 3 individual interviewees. University students were our targets because they are frequent users of the forum. And also a university email address and account was required to sign up for this forum, to become a member of this forum. So we believe university students would be reasonably familiar with doxing incidents on this forum. In the third phase of the project, we reviewed and analyzed the definitions and representations of doxing in a selection of legal and policy documents to reveal the possible mismatches between young people's and institutional understanding of the issue. So all the forum posts, the interview transcripts, and policy documents were analyzed using MaxQDA. The coding and analysis were performed in 2 stages. First was a thematic analysis following Van Dijk's semantic macro-analysis. We first identified the salient themes and subcategories of the data. And then the second stage, we paid closer attention to the linguistic and discursive strategies using CDA. And then we identified the key argumentation strategies related to the dissemination and justification of doxing. So I won't say too much about the survey findings, because the survey mainly served to identify the vocal participants and to obtain a sense of the participants' habits and general online practices. But just to quickly summarize, we found that over half, 67% of the participants actually did not know or were not aware of doxing law at all. Okay, so and that was the time when the doxing law was already in place for a few months. Okay, so we also found that the respondents have varying degrees of perception of doxing, especially in terms of the content disclosed and the harm caused. And doxing was constantly redefined by the participants through various justification and legitimation discourse strategies. And most of the participants found certain keywords in the doxing law confusing. And I'll talk about what those keywords are. And finally, discourses of uncertainty and ambivalence were evident in the interview data. So when it comes to the doxing law, we noticed conflicting discourses between the institutional definition and public representations of doxing, especially with keywords such as personal data, intent, and harm. Officially, personal data is defined very broadly, as you see here, as information, any information that relates to a living individual and can be used to identify that individual. Okay, so that's what's found on the official website. And in the survey, however, most of the respondents did not think or were not sure whether gathering publicly available information would constitute doxing. So to them, such information was seen as inherently public, and certain participants seem to have much narrower view of personal data compared to the PCPD's broad definition, where any accessible or processable information that identifies an individual would become personal data. So searchable information was interpreted by the interviewees as being made public already initially and willingly by the data owner. So as a result, as illustrated in these quotes, the participants believed that publishing such data online should not be treated as doxing. So interviewee one says, the point is, if you make your information public, it becomes public information that can be used by anyone for their own purpose. Interviewee two, if I forward someone else's Instagram profile or Facebook link, the information is supposedly public, meaning that the post is accessible to all. This kind of normalizing of sharing others' public information without actually referring to the purpose recurs in the interviews as a strategy of justifying the sharing of others' information as completely acceptable. And some interviewees found the word intent problematic, okay, as it was unclear to them how intent was assessed. So some participants were particularly concerned about how intent could be easily misinterpreted by subjective judgments. Concerns were also expressed over the boundary between acceptable and illegal intent and how that would impact those who might unintentionally disclose others' data due to ignorance of the law, as shown in these quotes. Interviewee 3 says, what counts as an intent of doxing? What does it mean by disclosing others' information with an intent? There's no explanation in the law. We don't know where to draw the line. And interviewee 1 says, ignorance can be forgiven. Others also hold varying opinions on whether jocular comments, or what DiNelle refers to as jocular insults, would be judged as malicious intent that bears legal consequence, as illustrated in these interview data. So interviewee 2 says, if the original poster simply posts a video of someone for amusement or for fun, then the commenters decide to dox the target in the video. Who should be held accountable? Is it the original poster or is it the commenter? Interviewee 4 says, even if it's just for a laugh, still you have disclosed another person's Instagram post. The target may not wish to have their information disclosed in this way. So as we see, recognizing intent isn't that straightforward. These quote reviews the complexity of the illocutionary force of the originally posted content and the perlocutionary effects of it on the part of the doxers. Both the forum and the interview data show that there's a complex nexus of motives that may trigger doxing behavior. And you see that harm is not always intended. Theories of pragmatics suggest that intentions and motivations cannot be easily proved, and they vary across contexts. Similar to face-to-face communication, the speaker's intention in online communication is not always consciously considered by the hearers in the process of the meaning making. So the reader's uptake may diverge from the writer's intention. Similarly, harm is another term that the participants found completely vague, or it's also prone to subjective interpretation. So we saw earlier in the law that there is an annotation of what constitutes harm or specified harm. Now, even with that in mind, some interviewees still express concerns as to how harm is proved, as interviewee 3 says here. Even if you ask a professional psychologist to evaluate whether one has experienced harm, it is all very subjective, I think. Okay. So another notable and rather interesting area of conflicting discourse is discourse of public interest. We found that both the supporters and the opponents of the doxing law draw on rather similar discourse strategies. That is, they refer to public interest when defending or criticizing doxing law. On one hand, institutional voices, the government's law, including the government and policymakers, often draw on the topos of harm and privacy invasion to frame doxing as harmful and threatening to the public, thus legitimizing the law as safeguarding public interests. Here is a quote from the Department of Justice of Hong Kong, in which the law is justified as a response to public interest. Now, at the same time, the opponents of the law, including some forum users and also interviewees, they describe doxing as a tool to seek retributive justice, and that the anti-doxing law is a threat to free speech. So quoting interviewee 2 here, if someone does something, including doxing, for public interest or to exercise their fourth power, my understanding is that doxing is not illegal. So they always refer to the fourth power, the media, okay, when they talk about doxing privately on the forum. So there are some significant mismatches between the official and public perceptions of what constitutes doxing and public interest. Achieving justice was repeatedly mentioned in the interviews as a positive outcome of doxing, as we see in these quotes. Interviewee 2 says, sometimes there are things that the law can't do, and we have to use public opinion to so-called sanction the wrongdoers. It is a matter of public interest. Interviewee 1 similarly says, I feel that doxing is a very neutral word, not a negative one. It serves as an alternative way to achieve justice. So to the participants, such informal, mediated justice is necessary when the perceived wrongdoing of the target is considered unacceptable, but not immediately illegal, such as, for example, poor customer service at a restaurant. So doxing and shaming deviant actions potentially promotes moral behavior or behavior that fosters cooperative behavior. And participants also believed that doxing can deter others from engaging in similar behavior, as illustrated by these interviewees' quotes. Interviewee 3, netizens may just want to warn others so that they won't approach this person and discourage others from repeating this behavior. Interviewee 4, what if I see someone being sexually abused and I disclose the wrongdoer's information? I do not do so to harm the wrongdoer. I do so to warn others. I see the need to tell the truth and to achieve justice. So again, you see that harm is not always the ultimate goal of these practices of doxing, which is quite different from how the law understands it, where harm or awareness of harm is a requirement. The participants also believed that information exposed through doxing could become evidence in formal investigations. So as we see here, interviewee 5 says, I think it is okay when doxed data becomes formal evidence. Interviewee 2, it is exactly because of the doxed information that there's evidence to make prosecution against the animal abusers. So this echoes the function of the so-called human flesh search engine in China, and online collective action, as I mentioned earlier, with the common goal of hunting down a target individual's demographic and geographic information to punish their deviant behaviors. And such unacceptable behaviors include people who abuse animals, teenagers who do not respect their elders, wealthy children who do not care about the feelings of others, and the behavior of corrupt officials, and etc. So many of these led to the targets being arrested or sacked. And in these cases, even if harm is caused, the participants believed that such harm is justified as the targets deserve such punishment. Now, in understanding participants' perceptions and attitudes towards doxing and its consequences, we also asked them to reflect on their experience as bystanders of doxing incidents online. One salient finding is that many participants demonstrated rather ambivalent attitudes towards doxing. We saw that they would positively and negatively evaluate doxing simultaneously, as we see here. Interviewee 2 says, I think rationally, everyone's privacy should be respected, but I think there are some people who deserve to be punished privately outside the law. Interviewee 4, I do sympathize those being doxed. Having said that, I still support doxing. Interviewee 5, doxing may sound like bad behavior, but I have to be honest that I'm amused when I follow doxing online. Is this the darker side of humankind? So what we're seeing here is that on one hand, the participants employed justification and framing strategies to positively evaluate doxing as a justice-seeking tool and as a deterrent to others. On the other hand, they would reposition doxed targets as victims experiencing harm, thus considering doxing as a transgressive or even immoral practice, as you see that they're having some kind of moments of moral doubts as well. So as shown in the data, despite the fact that these participants were all educated university students being informed the legal consequences of doxing, whether before or after participating in the study, their inability to make a stable decision between the perceived positive and negative impact of doxing suggests that doxing is a double-edged sword. Doxing on one hand exposes and punishes unacceptable behaviors and maintains social justice. On the other hand, it potentially damages targets' reputation and even their lives in some cases. Such discourse of ambivalence recurs in the interview. Michael Billig argues that ambivalence arises because of the conflicting nature of common sense, in that our attitudes represent unfinished business and the continual controversies of social life. In her recent work on online public shaming and morality, Pilar Blitvich argues that digital vigilantes are not one homogeneous community. And her ethnography of online shaming of racist incidents reveals that the vigilants also experience internal discursive struggle in assessing what counts as deviant behavior online. And our findings have also demonstrated such discursive struggle among the interviewees. So we therefore call for a conceptualization of ambivalence for analyzing public discourses concerning internet behaviors and the governance of such behaviors. Rather than vaguely applying ambivalence to all kinds of conflicting discourses, a systematic analysis of ambivalent discourse can unpack the complexity of online practices. So in the context of this study, we see conflicting discourses coming from those who expressed moral self-doubts, from seeing doxing first as immoral to later discovering it as purposeful. We also came across participants who first thought of doxing as a justice-seeking tool, who then later considered it as a transgressive practice. There were also those who expressed uncertainties by simply saying, I'm not sure. So a finer-grained framework of ambivalence that accounts for all these forms of attitudes can help us better understand the conditions under which doxing can be harmful or not. And another area that we found noteworthy is that, and quite unexpected, is that a number of the interviewees explicitly refers to how our interviews prompted their critical awareness of the issues that they had never thought about before participating in our study. So interviewee 3 says, I knew nothing about doxing. I never thought about whether it's right or wrong until I participated in the focus group. Getting to the individual interview, I realized that I had self-contradictions about doxing. And interviewee 5 said, I never forced myself to think critically about doxing. I only looked at it subjectively. I didn't like doxing, but after participating in this research, I realized it serves some purpose. So in a way, we also witness the participants' moral self-reflection in these processes of the research. We as researchers found this quite revealing, especially when participants also gained something out of the research process. And they went from expressing an emotionally charged understanding of doxing to thinking more critically about the moral consequences of the practice. So this could become tangible evidence of impacts arising from this study, we believe. So to wrap up, what do we learn or gain from a discourse perspective of policy research? First of all, we have noticed from the data that doxing and perhaps other online practices are highly complex and contextual in nature, with a range of perceived intent and methods. As discourse analysts, our job is not to stop doxing, and in fact, no one can stop it from happening. But a discursive approach to policy research can at least help uncover the competing discourses of ambivalence, thus also revealing the instability in internet governance. And in fact, as Trottier argues, the rise of the term internet governance, not internet policy, seems to suggest that how to govern the internet remains an unresolved, unstable, and open to challenge issue. Using discourse analysis in policy research is not new. For example, Ron Scullin, back in 2008, proposed this framework of public consultative discourse analysis, PCDA, that brings discourse analysis of documents to the process of public policy making. So we're calling for more future research that applies discourse analysis to the process of internet policy making. And to better understand the range of possible intents and motives of transgressive online behavior, more ethnographic research that takes researchers into the mob, for example, by interviewing the deviants or bystander users, is necessary to help address some of these questions about digital vigilantism in our contemporary cancel culture or call-out culture. I think that's it for my talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carmen, for this thought-provoking and very rich talk. I'm going to blend in the audience again.
Sharing, yeah, okay.
Yes, unless anyone asks for, maybe people will ask to see things again. So we'll see what happens. So we have plenty of time for discussion and comments on Carmen's talk, and let's see who would like to take the lead.
Comments would be welcome because it helps me further develop the project into some larger scale, hopefully.
Yes, it's good that we have time. So you can raise your hand or put questions in the chat. We observe all channels here. Maybe I can have the start while others are still thinking about it. So I have many questions, and one that comes to mind is about the intercultural or nation-specific differences in perceptions and evaluations of doxing. So in the two societies I'm most familiar with, I think that in Germany, doxing and any other misuse of personal information would be very much looked down upon. So would be very much disapproved. And of course, there are always differences, but I think this would be the more mainstream approach, that doxing as a form maybe of self-justice would not be acceptable under any circumstances. And Greece, I would situate somewhere between Germany and Hong Kong, or Germany and the USA, maybe, in the sense that there is, under certain conditions, for certain events or maybe crimes committed against others, different forms of self-justice would be deemed appropriate by some of members of the population. Did you have a chance to do such, cross-cultural comparisons, let's say?
No, that sounds like a great project, but no, I haven't. But what you talked about is very interesting, the cross-cultural elements of it. But even I think within or among my participants, I'm really not saying that they are coherent in thinking, and that's why I was showing all those ambivalent attitudes, right? It's not that they always see it as just a seeking tool. So, I think, in a way, I read the other day that, doxing could also serve as a form of, self-identification to a certain political stance. For example, in the context of the protests, for example, in Hong Kong. So there's this group of students coming together who felt that doxing was something right to do at the time. When they sort of stepped out a little bit, when they acted as interviewee, doing self-reflection, they started thinking about, they actually know that it's something not quite acceptable morally under normal circumstances. And for example, they would think that they don't like to be doxed, for example. So there's this kind of struggle, constantly going on when they talk about it. So it's really contextual in nature, I would say. Yeah. So the cultural perception, I haven't really thought much about that, but maybe it's something worth pursuing. It's very interesting, yeah.
Because these different social perceptions might be connected to lawmaking and so to policy formation.
Yes.
Maybe I can take a comment we have in the chat by Carla and Tag, if I'm allowed to read it out. Or Carlin, would you like to read it out yourself? Maybe, let's see. Yeah. No, I can do that.
Well, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go on. Go on.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if my microphone was going to work, but that's fine. Thank you very much, Carmen. That was brilliant. I was wondering about the forum posts that you mentioned, the posts and the comments that you mentioned in your sort of methods bit. And I'm just wondering if, I presume that some of the same participants that you interviewed are also on that forum. And I just wondered if the way they talked about doxing was different there. Is it less aware or less ambivalent to what they told you in the interviews?
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. So I didn't really show much of the forum data. I had to really select bits and pieces for this talk. So I wanted to focus on the interviews this time. But first of all, now there was, for ethical reasons, I really didn't get to the people who actually doxed on the forum. Okay, so because it's all anonymous on the forum, there's no private messaging function on the forum. So I really couldn't tell, if my participants were the same people who actually doxed on the forum. So I could only do meta commenting, right, really eliciting their perceptions. With the assumption that they were bystanders, they actually witnessed these doxing incidents online, and they actually told me so. So, but there were actually on the forum, I would say those incidents, they were more coherent in thinking, because that the actual doxing discussion happened at the time of the event of the protest, right? When the sentiments and the emotions actually heightened and escalated. So as I mentioned earlier, it was more like, in a way, a way of identifying themselves as part of the community on the forum, sharing the same political view. Okay, and then for the interview participants, that was done much later. So what they said was more retrospective, and so there was more ambivalence going on, I would say. So there were less ambivalent attitude, and when in fact, when someone in some of the discussion online, when someone actually tries to defend the doxing law, they would be scrutinized and criticized by the other forum users. So that's the interesting thing that I noted there. Yeah. But thanks, Caroline.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting.
I hope I answered your question. Yeah.
Let's take one by Pai Yu Liao. Please take the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you for your very interesting research and the talk. Actually, I'm also doing something similar with CDA, but I'm doing something about Taiwan social movement. So I'm really curious about your methodology. So I got 3 questions here. The first one is you mentioned about that you used interview during your research. So what kind of language that you use in your interview? I mean, with the interview, because I think maybe people in Hong Kong, they speak English and Cantonese.
Sorry, I should have mentioned that the interview was in Cantonese, later translated by me into English. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Len. I would like to ask: do you think is there kind of difficulties that you meet when you translate things, because sometimes the language difference maybe cause different things?
Yeah, it's always a question for us, you know, as someone doing this kind of research and then presenting our research in English. Okay, so if we do research, you know, in a certain context that doesn't use English as primary language, I feel in a way it's inevitable. Okay, that we have to translate it for the audience. We could have asked them to do so in English, but we felt that with this kind of topic, especially a more sensitive topic, they would feel more comfortable talking to us with a shared language. So that's how the decision was made. In terms of translation, it took several layers of validating and checking, and that's all we could do really. First translated by an RA, and then the full-time RA read it, and then I read it. So there was cross-checking going on. Yeah, but I think that's probably an issue shared by any kind of research that involves translated content, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your answer. I just remind me if you already mentioned, because my English is not good, but I just want to know what kind of software that you use to analyze your data. I mean, you mentioned some kind of keywords in the interview or something.
MaxQDA, that's a qualitative.
Okay, so just one, the software. And then the third question is that, is there any difficulties that you bump into while you're collecting this kind of data? For example, like the interviewees, they some kind of words they don't really just something in their minds, but they may not really able to speak out. I don't know if in the
I'm just recalling whether there was any difficulty, because that's a good question actually. What was the biggest challenge in the research? We all agreed that it's a sensitive topic that we were dealing with. And the way we identified the interviewee was done through the survey. So at the end of the survey, we asked if they would be willing to further participate in the project as, you know, interviewees. So those who actually agreed were very few anyway. But then, of course, those who agreed really had something to say. So otherwise, they wouldn't have agreed anyway. So because they're just doing it, you know, on voluntary basis. So they were very willing to open up. And in fact, we did elicit quite revealing rich data in both the focus group discussion and the individual interviews. Some just really opened up and told us that they have been victims of doxxing, even though they agree that, you know, the doxxing also serves some purpose, including seeking justice. So there was all this interesting data. It's quite revealing too. And no, I think they were quite frank to us in general, because they did say yes to the interview. So we didn't really come across bits and pieces where they were uncomfortable about it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The floor is available for more questions and comments. Caroline, yes, please go ahead, and then I'll put myself on the list as well. Please go ahead, Caroline.
Okay, I did have another question about the ethics of the project. I guess this is again thinking less of the interview and the focus group data and more of the actual examples of doxing. So you shared a couple of examples, sort of screenshots of doxing in this presentation. I presume if you're talking about the forum posts and things in other presentations, you'll share more. And I suppose that occurs to me that's a sort of process, part of the process of recontextualization, that you're now sharing these images in an academic context. So I wondered about the sort of ethical implications of that. And I also wondered whether you and your team are opening yourselves up to being doxed yourself by reporting on this, and whether that was something that you considered.
That's a very good question. So we were constantly aware of the risk of doing this project. The screenshots was obviously edited. So originally it's all clear anyway with the face and everything. And even with that, you're quite right that, what kind of decision was made. So at some point I do see publications, with edited images, but so I think that's something that I did by editing the image. And I try as much as possible not to actually show the faces of anyone. Was I really worried about being doxed? It's no, I don't think that's what I thought, but because I set out very clearly at the beginning that I'm doing a linguistics discourse-oriented project. No, I'm not there to really identify any doxing cases. No, I've just kept it empirical and really talking about and trying to focus on the different perspectives and voices there. So, but it has been an issue, right? When we deal with publicly available data, how do we feel comfortable in doing the research, and at the same time also protecting both the participants and ourselves. So yes, I think one obvious thing that I have done really is to really set out clearly to the participants that I'm doing research as a linguist. Okay, and no, yeah, but that's a very interesting thing. Yeah, and it's a government-funded project. You're quite right too. So maybe the dynamics would be a little bit tricky there. Yeah. Yeah. Not yet. I don't think so. If you see me somewhere, let me know. Yeah, but that's a very interesting question. Yeah. But I'm not really saying anything completely extremely controversial here. I'm really reporting data empirically. So I feel, so far I feel all right about it.
Yeah. I feel like I've heard that defense before of, I'm only looking at the language.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, and perhaps it does work in terms of the public's response. Okay, just looking at the linguistics.
No, seriously, there are colleagues from political research who are really doing something even more, exciting than this anyway. So I feel that it shouldn't really stop me from doing it. Yeah, because of this. So because it's something that I'm interested in doing anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Okay, so I came as an afterthought. So this is not the question I want to ask, but I thought that it would be nice if you could conclude by saying, how do you think your research will influence or could influence policy? But what you got me thinking about is the relationship between media affordances, different practices of doxing, and different perceptions and evaluations of doxing. Now, back in the day, when we only had internet relay chat and email in mailing groups, the only way to do doxing was by text. And in fact, the original definition of doxing as a practice is the disclosing of textual information like name and address and things like that. Now, with the change of and the enhancement of media affordances, then people can post photos, and you have all these visual culture in social media. And so, in fact, it came to me as a surprise that at least people in Hong Kong and probably elsewhere too appreciate or understand these posting photos of others without their consent as a practice of doxing. So I think this is interesting. It's not my understanding of doxing, but it's true in a particular community. And it must be later chronologically than the first one. Now, do you think that these changing and also conflicting evaluations of doxing are in some way related to these different practices of doxing involving textual information or also image. So are people more favorable of doxing when it's just showing people's misbehavior instead of disclosing their address?
No, it's not just that. I think, So you're quite right that much of the doxing I've seen here are multimodal or increasingly multimodal. It is images that's really, are open to more scrutiny and criticism. For example, they're random shaming on their images, for example, on their appearance. So again, that's another question. Doxing often leads to other forms of non-doxing related shaming, or hate speech. So something like, commenting on someone's appearance, this person's appearance has nothing to do with, identifying this person. They're just getting together to hate on this person. Doxing is part of it, really. So did they really go to this person's address and do something? Very likely, no. Yeah. So that's the thing about it's part of I think it's more situated in the movements, and the law actually was actually in place and being discussed as a result of this very specific incidents of police, officers doxing. Of course, the government frames it as, an overall kind of issue, but I think it's highly contextualized in this case. But as I said, there were previously more cases of doxing even before the process anyway. So I don't think it's the affordances that change people's way of thinking. They also started a signal group, which is mainly text-based as well. So they have different forms, and it's polymedia actually. That doxing, but so I just focused on this very forum because it drew more attention in Hong Kong. And in fact, later on, many of the posts that I originally saw on as doxing incidents were removed already. I think either by the posters themselves, after the law and so on. So it's certainly multimodal in nature in many ways, because they want to see that person's face, in order to shame them. But I don't think it's the ambivalence arise from the
modalities.
And you asked about the policy implications.
Yes, that would be nice. Yes, please.
That's the most challenging part, to be very honest with you, in the process. So it's a public policy project, so we have to be very explicit about our policy recommendations to the government. So from the findings, we made I think 4 recommendations. I think I have some notes here as well. So I talked about first of all, encouraging better understanding of public perceptions on the part of the government through different kinds of public forums, which they're doing already. Of course, whether they would focus on things like self-reflection, ambivalence, probably that's not something that they've done. So we would recommend that as part of their outreach activities, for example, introducing more elements of self-reflection and critical awareness. We, of course, encourage the government to recognize the value of language-oriented research in policy developments. Okay, so at least, I think the least we can do is to draw their attention to the relevance of language in these online practices, and I think that's the least I can do at this point. So I shouldn't be too ambitious about making changes at this from this 1-year project. But I'm happy enough to just draw their attention to the importance of discourse and language. So promoting legal language education, for example, even the words and terms in the law, were completely vague and ambiguous to the participants. So that's something that they can consider as well. And encouraging interdisciplinary research. That's something that I felt I needed to work with someone outside the discipline to clarify several things for me as well. So it would be nice to, involve people from, legal research, psychology even, and so on. So that would be very interesting. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's some of the relevance and recommendations that we've made. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So let us then conclude on this point. And thank you so much once again for your thought-provoking and engaging talk, Carmen, today. And thank you all attending. And please come back on the 7th of December for this year's last talk with Jack Grieve in computational social linguistics. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.